Here's exactly why you don't need an LLC for rental properties. Currently, I own over $2.5 million worth of real estate across multiple properties, and I have my fair share of tenant issues. I have a slight hatred for the mortgage loan process, but something I do not have is an LLC for my rental properties. And in this video, I'm gonna show you why you probably don't need one either. If you want to save time and money on your real estate journey, this video is for you. Let's get right into it. Okay, so when you start your real estate journey, you might find and stumble upon information that says you must have an LLC for rental properties, or even you need a separate LLC for each and every property that you have. And I found that the push for LLCs on real estate investors really comes from two groups of people. Now, the first group is lawyers and accountants with a monetary incentive for you to have an LLC. And the second group consists of other investors who have good intentions, but were advised by those same lawyers and accountants with a monetary incentive for you to get an LLC. And look, while a monetary incentive might make people biased, an incentive alone does not mean that an LLC is not good for real estate. So let's dig a little bit deeper to see why an LLC is probably not needed for your rental properties. Starting with what an LLC even is. An LLC, short for Limited Liability Company, combines the pass-through taxation of a partnership or a sole proprietorship with the liability protection of a corporation. So owning a property in an LLC simply means that you don't personally own that property in your personal name. A company that you own owns the property. And by doing so, you have certain tax and liability implications that you need to know about. And we'll touch on those a little bit later. So for now, let's look at the 4 biggest reasons people give for setting up an LLC for your rental property. Reason number 1, investors want liability protection. Reason number 2, investors want tax advantages. Reason number 3, investors want to remain anonymous. And reason number 4, you can split ownership with a partner. Now, look, generally, these sound like amazing reasons to get an LLC for your rental properties. But let's dive a little bit deeper into each one to see if it really holds any weight. Starting with the fact that LLCs limit your liability. The goal here is to separate yourself from a potential lawsuit, either from a tenant or someone else on the property, which seems reasonable, but here are some things I want you to consider. The first is risk versus costs. You'd have to put each and every property into their own LLC to really maximize the liability protection benefit. And if you don't, those properties not in separate LLCs are vulnerable. Now, number 3 and number 4 that we're going to cover shortly covers this. Okay, the second thing I want you to consider is that liability protection isn't guaranteed. Any good lawyer will attempt to override an LLC's liability protection, something called piercing the corporate veil. And if successful, your liability protection literally just flew out the window. The third thing I want you to consider is homeowners insurance. Now, because you are a wise investor, I already know that you have enough homeowners insurance to cover you for liability protection. And because you do, liability protection is already covered under your policy. Which brings me to the 4th thing that I want you to consider, and that's an umbrella policy. If your normal everyday homeowners insurance protection isn't enough, you can always get a very cheap umbrella policy to cover all of your properties for a relatively low cost, adding additional protection on top of your homeowner's insurance, which makes you wonder if liability protection from an LLC is even needed. And the 5th thing I want you to consider when thinking about a liability protection that you get from an LLC is that large judgments are actually rare. For well-maintained and professionally managed properties, large judgments are rare. And if you use a management company, typically they are the ones liable in certain situations and typically have their own liability protection to cover them in these instances. Okay, argument number 2 that I hear often is that LLCs have tax advantages. And I'm going to tell you flat out that is a myth. LLCs do not have any extra tax benefits over a sole proprietorship. Now, I already know there's going to be someone who says this. But Karan, what about having my LLC taxed as an S Corp? Wouldn't that help me save on my taxes? Well, yeah, generally an S Corp would help you save on taxes, specifically self-employment taxes. And while that may be true, when it comes to real estate, there are a number of reasons why you don't want to be taxed as an S Corp when you own real estate, like the removal of the step-up basis, or the fact that taxable income is typically minimal if you're taking depreciation, which you should be. So if tax advantages is one of the reasons you want an LLC for your rental properties, stop it. Seriously, stop it, because an LLC won't help you there and will only add complexity and costs without any tax benefits. Okay, so the third argument that I hear for LLCs, once again, is that LLCs provide anonymity. So if someone goes to look up your property, what they'll find as the owner is the LLC and not your name. And that sounds like a good thing. However, in most states, an LLC's ownership and who owns the LLC is public information and is easy to find because most people simply put themselves as the owner of their LLC. And anyone that wants the information for your LLC can get it pretty easily by simply doing a business search. Now, this may be bold, but I'm going to go out on the limb here and say that you're probably not a criminal looking to launder your money through real estate. But if you are an LLC filed in your state with yourself as the owner, is not going to protect you. Which brings me to the fourth reason people say they want an LLC for their real estate, and that's to split ownership. Now, this is one of the situations where it actually makes sense to get an LLC for your property if you want to split ownership of that property. And without a formal business structure, it can be hard to enforce things that are not in an operating agreement, which you should have if you are an LLC. Things like financial responsibilities and duties amongst partners should be in an LLC's operating agreement, making them binding by law. Now, let's look at two very strong reasons against getting an LLC for your real estate. The first, and this is a big one, is that mortgages are harder to obtain. And for most small investors, this is probably the most critical issue. And that's because for small investors like me and you, low cost fixed rate mortgages are the key to success in real estate. And having your property in an LLC will make obtaining a mortgage 10 times harder. Banks usually only loan to LLCs with history of profit and doing business. A newly formed LLC has neither. So if you don't get flat out denied from the banks, the rate you get won't be as lucrative as if you had it personally, which cuts into your profit, your cash flow, and your ROI. Now, I know what you're thinking. You can transfer it out of your name into an LLC later. And yeah, that's true. But some things happen when you do that. The bank can call the loan due, which I do admit is pretty rare. You may have to pay taxes on that transfer, which could increase your expenses. And by having an LLC for your property, things like homeowners insurance is going to cost a lot more. Which brings me to the second reason why having an LLC for your real estate is likely not a good idea. And that's because it's going to increase your costs and add complexity forever. You see, every LLC will have the following associated costs to create and maintain that LLC. I'm talking things like incorporation fees, right? That you need to actually create the LLC, which can run a few $100s. And then you're going to have tax preparation fees for each one of those LLCs. You're going to have to file them separately, which will run you a couple $100 to a couple $1,000s per year, because any good accountant will want to separate those LLCs and have you pay for them separately. And if you do it yourself, you're just going to have to take that time to self-prepare. In addition, every LLC you have will need to be renewed annually. And the larger the portfolio, the more complex having an LLC for each and every property gets. So, do you need an LLC for your real estate? Well, having an LLC for small investors just adds complexity and costs. There are simple ways to protect yourself from liability and maintain accurate financials without an LLC. If you have partners, okay, an LLC makes sense, but in most cases, not really. Look, I've said a lot. I would like to hear from you. Let me know in the comments if you agree or if you disagree. Any and all discussion helps us become better real estate investors. Now, I'm going to place a few videos on the screen I think you should watch next. Be sure to check them out. And if you haven't already, go ahead and like this video for me. It truly helps other people to find this video and benefit from the information in it. And go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more information that helps you save on taxes and build your businesses. I'm Karan from Life Accounting, and I'll see you in the next video.